This moment could be a catalyst, not just for one person, but for the world watching. A voice has risen once again, challenging power, questioning silence, and daring to speak truth when it's most inconvenient. But what happens when that voice stands against a superpower? When words ignite headlines and conviction meets backlash? In this video, you're going to see a clash, not of weapons, but of values. A confrontation between youth in authority, between moral urgency and political strategy. What began as a protest has now turned into something far bigger, a global argument about truth, justice, and who gets to decide what's right. We'll uncover what really sparked this explosion of anger and resistance. What message was so bold that it shook governments and divided nations? And why this moment right now could change how the world sees activism forever. But here's the twist that most people missed. Behind every headline, there's a deeper story, a story about courage under pressure, about the cost of speaking when silence would be safer, about how one spark, if not contained, can ignite a movement that no one can control. Stay till the end, because understanding this isn't just about one event. It's about every time you've wanted to speak, but were told not to. Every moment you've seen injustice and wondered if one voice could matter. This might just prove that it can. She began as a quiet teenager sitting alone outside her country's parliament, holding a handwritten sign that read, "School Strike for Climate." No fame, no followers, just conviction. That image of a single girl skipping school to protest in the cold spread across the world like wildfire. People called her stubborn, emotional, even naive, but she didn't stop. Her message was simple: our house is on fire and no one seems to care. Within months, her voice became the rallying cry of a generation tired of empty promises and endless pollution. That was the birth of a movement. Millions of young people joined her in the streets. Politicians had to listen, even if they didn't want to. She spoke at summits, stared down world leaders, and demanded accountability in ways adults had avoided for decades. But this wasn't just about climate anymore. Over time, her mission grew broader. Justice, equality, and human rights began to merge with her environmental fight. She saw all these issues as connected, one system of greed, power, and silence that put profit before people. And that's what led her into one of the most heated and controversial moments of her activism: the confrontation tied to the Israel-Gaza conflict. It didn't happen overnight. For months, she had been watching the news, reading reports of bombings, displacement, and suffering. To her, the crisis wasn't about politics, it was about humanity. And as she saw children dying and voices being silenced, she couldn't stay quiet. Her principles had always been the same: to speak for those who have no voice. So when the images from Gaza began flooding social media, she reacted not as a diplomat, but as a human being. Her activism had always carried a tone of urgency, but this time the tone was different. It was heavier, angrier, more emotional. She joined rallies, raised banners, and called out leaders by name. In her eyes, the same governments that claimed to protect democracy were now turning a blind eye to suffering. That's where the friction began. Many of her supporters stood with her, but others, especially in the West, accused her of crossing a line. Suddenly, she wasn't just a climate girl anymore. She was being called political, biased, and divisive. Still, she didn't back down. She saw the fight for the planet and the fight for people as one and the same. Her words were blunt: you cannot preach about justice while funding destruction. It was a statement that sent shockwaves. The U.S., which she often referenced indirectly, became a target of her frustration. To her, the world's most powerful nation couldn't claim leadership while supporting violence. And when she said that publicly, the backlash was instant. Media outlets, split in their response. Some celebrated her courage, others tore her apart. Political commentators said she had lost focus, that she was no longer talking about climate, but about war. Yet for her, it was all connected. Environmental collapse, social injustice, war. She saw them all as different faces of the same global sickness. Her explosion wasn't planned. It was the result of years of frustration, watching the same patterns repeat under different names. Then came the moment that turned tension into confrontation, her participation in a Gaza aid mission. The flotilla was meant to deliver humanitarian supplies, a peaceful act that quickly turned political. Authorities detained and deported her, and within hours the world was watching. Cameras captured her anger, her tears, and her defiance. Silence is complicity, she said. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a declaration of war against hypocrisy. What followed was chaos. U.S. officials fired back, calling her statements reckless. Critics said she was being manipulated. Supporters praised her for saying what few dared to. In that storm of opinions, one thing became clear: she had stepped into a conflict much larger than herself. Her voice, once focused on melting glaciers and carbon emissions, was now echoing in the middle of a political battlefield. But for her, it wasn't about politics. It was about empathy. The same empathy that made her fight for the planet now made her speak for people under siege. She didn't see borders, religions, or sides. She saw human beings, and that belief that every life carries the same value is what led to this confrontation. It wasn't planned, it wasn't strategic, it was raw, emotional truth. The kind of truth that challenges those in power and exposes what they'd rather keep hidden. In her mind, silence in the face of suffering is betrayal. And so she spoke loudly, fearlessly, and without apology. The world heard her, and whether they loved or hated her words, no one could ignore them. This was no longer just about the environment. It had become something deeper, a test of conscience, a clash between moral urgency and political convenience. And once again, she found herself standing alone, holding a message that shook the world. When she finally spoke, the tone was nothing like the calm, measured speeches that had once made her famous. This time, her voice was sharper, urgent, emotional, and filled with fury. Standing before a sea of cameras, she didn't try to please anyone. She didn't filter her words for comfort or diplomacy. She said what she believed the world needed to hear, even if it burned bridges. Her statement was simple, but its impact was seismic. Silence in the face of suffering is complicity. The word struck like lightning. She accused powerful nations of choosing politics over humanity, of pretending to stand for peace while enabling destruction. She didn't name the United States directly at first, but everyone knew where her message was aimed. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from conviction. She spoke about Gaza, the bombings, the displaced families, the starving children, and how the world's silence had become unbearable. If you can watch injustice and still justify it, she said, you have lost your humanity. Those who had once praised her for speaking truth to power now began to shift uncomfortably. She was no longer talking about carbon emissions or melting ice caps. She was talking about blood, power, and moral hypocrisy. For many, that was a step too far. The crowd was divided. Some erupted in applause, tears in their eyes. Others turned away, uneasy with how directly she was challenging Western governments. But she didn't care. You cannot call yourself a leader of freedom while funding oppression, she declared. You cannot say you want peace while sending weapons to war. Every sentence cut deep. Her words weren't gentle warnings, they were accusations, heavy, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The media wasted no time amplifying her speech. Headlines used words like explodes, lashes out, and defies. Clips of her emotional delivery spread across every social platform. Supporters praised her for standing where others were afraid to stand. Critics called her ignorant, manipulated, or worse. The more attention she drew, the louder the backlash became. And soon enough, the response she probably expected came from the United States itself. Within hours, political commentators and government officials began responding. Some dismissed her remarks as uninformed youth outrage. Others accused her of spreading dangerous propaganda. But the loudest voice came from the former president, who wasted no time firing back. In his usual fashion, he mocked her, calling her angry, ungrateful, and out of control. He said she was being used by political forces she didn't understand, claiming she was just another puppet for radical activists. The comments spread like wildfire, filling social media feeds with insults and defense in equal measure. It wasn't the first time he had mocked her, but this time it felt different. This wasn't a climate debate or a spat over policy. It was about war, death, and moral responsibility. She had touched a nerve, one that exposed the fragility of political image and power. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. She took to her platform again, this time responding not with anger, but with clarity. "If defending human rights makes me radical," she wrote, "then I will never be moderate." That one line went viral, a rallying cry for millions who felt silenced by political correctness and fear. The confrontation became a spectacle. News networks debated her motives. Was she brave or reckless? Was she informed or misguided? Analysts broke down her words like they were policy documents. Meanwhile, her followers saw something more. A young woman refusing to be intimidated by authority. Her courage reminded them of something the world had forgotten. Truth doesn't need permission. Still, the political establishment saw it differently. They viewed her words as an attack, an intrusion into matters too complex for a young activist to understand. Statements poured in defending the U.S. position, emphasizing balance, security, and alliance. But no amount of political phrasing could erase the image of her standing defiantly, refusing to apologize. That image became a symbol, not just of rebellion, but of moral confrontation. The world watched as two forces collided, one armed with power, the other with conviction. The clash wasn't equal, but it was visible. Her words exposed the discomfort of those who spoke of peace while funding war. Their counterattacks exposed how fragile power becomes when challenged by raw truth. Every tweet, every headline, every insult only amplified her message. The more they tried to discredit her, the more people began to listen. In her eyes, this was never about ego or fame. It was about conscience. She wasn't trying to be a politician. She was trying to be human in a world that rewards indifference. The former president's mockery didn't silence her. It made her louder. It showed that even in a world obsessed with control, one voice, armed only with honesty, could still shake the walls of power. And as her words continued to echo, it became clear that this wasn't just an argument. It was a test of truth, courage, and the cost of speaking out when silence is safer. After her explosive remarks, the world split down the middle. Supporters rallied behind her with passion and pride, flooding social media with messages of solidarity. They called her brave, fearless, the voice of conscience in an age of silence. To them, she wasn't just speaking about Gaza. She was speaking about every injustice ignored by those in power. People from different countries, religions, and causes joined her message, using her words to spark protests, petitions, and open discussions about accountability. Her face, once known for climate strikes, now became a global symbol of resistance. She's saying what we're all afraid to say, one supporter posted. That sentiment spread like a wave. Her followers believed she had broken through the wall of political correctness that kept so many silent. To them, this wasn't about taking sides in a conflict. It was about defending humanity itself. They saw her courage as a mirror of their own frustration. Years of watching leaders deliver speeches about peace while funding destruction. Activists around the world picked up her message, carrying signs that read "Silence is complicity" and "Justice for all lives." The movement was no longer just hers, it had become something collective, something unstoppable. But on the other side, critics came forward just as fiercely. They accused her of being reckless, emotional, and misinformed. Political figures claimed she had stepped into matters far beyond her understanding. News anchors questioned her credibility, saying she had been manipulated by extremist narratives. She's lost her focus, they said. She's no longer an environmental activist. She's now a political pawn. Their tone carried the weight of authority, but beneath it there was fear. Fear that her influence might actually shift public opinion in ways they couldn't control. Diplomats called her speech dangerous, arguing it could worsen tensions in an already fragile situation. They said her words ignored the complexity of the conflict, that she was simplifying decades of history into slogans. But that was exactly her point. She wasn't trying to be a historian. She was trying to be a human being. Her focus wasn't on policies, but on pain, the kind that can't be justified by politics. And that distinction, more than anything, is what made her statement so powerful and so divisive. Political commentators began dissecting her motives. Some suggested she was trying to stay relevant as the world's attention drifted from climate issues. Others said her involvement in the Gaza conversation was part of a broader awakening, a recognition that justice cannot be selective. The debate spread into parliaments, universities, and online spaces. In one corner, people admired her honesty. In the other, they dismissed her as naive. But what everyone agreed on was that she had reignited a conversation that many preferred to keep buried. The moral layer of the situation was impossible to ignore. Supporters saw her as a reminder that moral clarity doesn't come from age or office. It comes from empathy. They argued that too many powerful figures hide behind complexity as an excuse for inaction. She cut through that with a single sentence, asking, "Since when did compassion require permission?" That line alone turned into a chant in rallies across multiple countries. Yet her critics saw moral arrogance in her tone. They argued that her purity of intent blinded her to the harsh realities of international politics. To them, morality without strategy was dangerous. Then came the diplomatic consequences. Governments that had once celebrated her climate leadership began to distance themselves. Some quietly removed her photos from previous campaigns. Others declined to comment. She was no longer the world's favorite activist. She was now a polarizing figure. International leaders walked a tightrope, careful not to criticize her too harshly, yet unwilling to endorse her stance. Her confrontation with power had moved from speeches to silence. Not her silence, but theirs. The silence of those who didn't want to choose a side. Behind the scenes, foreign ministries monitored the situation closely. Her statements were being quoted in protests across Europe, the Middle East, and Latin America. Diplomats worried that her influence could inflame public sentiment and pressure governments to change their tone on the conflict. To them, she was unpredictable, not bound by party lines or diplomatic rules. That made her dangerous in the eyes of politicians, but invaluable in the eyes of ordinary people who felt unheard. In the moral theater of global politics, her stand exposed uncomfortable truths. Nations that spoke of human rights suddenly appeared selective in their compassion. Institutions that praised freedom of speech tried to discredit hers. The contradictions were glaring, and she held up a mirror to them all. Whether people agreed or not, she forced the world to confront its own double standards. And while critics continued their campaigns, trying to frame her as misguided, her message only grew louder. Her supporters didn't see a perfect activist. They saw an imperfect human being refusing to stay quiet in the face of suffering. The clash between her conviction and their condemnation revealed more than political tension. It revealed the deep moral fracture running through global society. In the end, the debate wasn't about her anymore. It was about what kind of world people were willing to defend, one ruled by comfort and caution, or one brave enough to face the truth, no matter how inconvenient it sounds. The moment her words hit the airwaves, the media machine began to spin. Every network, every headline, every commentator wanted a piece of the story. But the way it was told depended on who was telling it. Some outlets painted her as a hero, a young woman unafraid to speak truth to power, standing up for the voiceless when world leaders turned their backs. Others twisted her into a villain, reckless, misled, and out of her depth. The same speech was cut, clipped, and edited to create entirely different realities. One channel showed her with passion and tears. Another showed her anger and defiance. In the age of perception, framing is power, and she had just become the newest battlefield. Social media amplified everything. Tenfold, hashtags trended in both directions, some praising her as the moral conscience of a generation, others condemning her as a puppet of propaganda. Short clips ripped out of context flooded timelines, spreading faster than the full video ever could. People didn't see the entire speech. They saw versions shaped by bias, by anger, by agenda. Each group claimed ownership of the truth, while the truth itself was buried under algorithms and outrage. It was no longer about what she said, but about what others wanted it to mean. Mainstream commentators joined in, adding fuel to the fire. They invited experts, diplomats, and psychologists to debate her character rather than her message. Was she mentally stable? Was she being used? Or why was she so angry? Every question seemed designed to divert attention from the real issue, the suffering she was speaking about. The narrative shifted from Gaza to Greta, from tragedy to theater. News became entertainment, and her pain became a headline. Some outlets tried to maintain neutrality, but even neutrality became its own form of bias. The way a camera lingers on a face, the tone of a headline, the order of sentences, every decision shapes emotion. In this case, emotion was everything. Viewers weren't given facts, they were given feelings. One station portrayed her as a saint, another as a troublemaker. And somewhere in between, the world stopped listening to the message and started judging the messenger. This media storm had consequences beyond screens. Governments used the polarized coverage to justify their own stances. Politicians cited misinformation as a reason to dismiss her, while activists cited suppression as proof she was right. The clash became symbolic of something much larger, the battle over who controls the story. When truth becomes filtered through politics, even sincerity looks suspicious. And she, standing at the center of that storm, learned that the world doesn't punish lies. It punishes those who reveal them. The consequences of this media framing are already unfolding. In the short term, her reputation is both amplified and attacked. Supporters grow more loyal, inspired by how she stands alone against powerful institutions. Critics grow louder, using every headline to question her motives and credibility. This polarization cements her place as a controversial figure, loved and hated in equal measure. But in the long term, the effects could ripple far beyond her. For activists around the world, her experience is a warning. The moment a cause gains traction, the narrative can be hijacked. The same networks that lift you up can tear you down the next day. Words can be edited, intentions distorted, and courage weaponized against itself. It shows how modern media doesn't just inform, it molds opinion, often serving the interests of those already in power. In her case, the issue of Gaza became background noise to the spectacle of her defiance. The story shifted from the oppressed to the outspoken, from suffering to scandal. Yet that shift carries its own danger. When the focus moves away from the cause, public empathy fades. People argue about personalities instead of principles. It's easier to debate her than to confront the reality of bombed cities and starving families. And that's the power of framing, to distract, divide, and dull the world's conscience while pretending to enlighten it. Diplomatically, her statements may trigger real consequences. Some nations might distance themselves from her movements, worried about being seen as taking sides. Invitations to global summits could quietly disappear. Funding and partnerships might dry up. She may become a symbol too risky to associate with, too unpredictable to endorse. But history has shown that such isolation often transforms into influence. When institutions reject a truth teller, the people listen more closely. There's also a moral consequence waiting to unfold. The more the media distorts, the more people question what they're being told. Every misrepresented quote chips away at public trust. Every biased headline reminds viewers that truth isn't free, it's filtered. In trying to discredit her, the media may have accidentally exposed itself. So the aftermath won't just be about her career or reputation. It will be about a larger awakening, about how stories are shaped, who gets to tell them, and what price the truth demands. Because when media framing turns reality into performance, someone always pays the cost. And in this case, it might not be her. It might be the world that stops believing what it sees. It begins quietly, with murmurs that soon turn into echoes across continents. The confrontation has now spilled beyond social media and press rooms. It's seeping into parliaments, protests, classrooms, and even boardrooms. This is where the fight shifts from a single voice challenging authority to a global conversation about power, truth, and moral courage. The world is watching as lines are redrawn, not between nations, but between values. One side stands for order and alliances. The other demands accountability, empathy, and human rights for all, regardless of political convenience. This tension is shaping a new battleground, one not fought with missiles but with microphones, platforms, and moral conviction. What's happening now could redefine activism itself. For years, Greta's voice was tied to climate justice, a universal issue with growing consensus. But now she has stepped into something far more divided, the conflict over Israel and Gaza. It's a place where words can carry the weight of war and silence can be seen as complicity. The moment she spoke out, she didn't just take a side, she entered one of the most polarized debates of our time. Governments took notice, diplomats hesitated, protesters found inspiration, critics found ammunition. This isn't just a speech anymore. It's a spark that has illuminated the global fault lines of morality, politics, and public opinion. In Europe, rallies began spreading across capitals, some in support, others in anger. Politicians scrambled to respond, unsure of how to align without alienating their voters. In the Middle East, her words were amplified, replayed, and dissected. To some, she became a voice for the voiceless. To others, a symbol of hypocrisy. In America, the reaction was swift and divided. Some praised her bravery, saying she spoke truth to power. Others accused her of being naive, of misunderstanding real-world politics. But beneath it all, one thing became clear. This moment was no longer just about one statement. It was about how far the truth can go before power tries to silence it. Every global issue has a tipping point, and this could be one. Activism is now borderless. Messages spread faster than policy, and one person's outrage can become another's movement overnight. The digital world has made solidarity instant, but also fragile. Hashtags rise and fall, yet real suffering continues. Greta's confrontation with the U.S. may have started as a clash of perspectives, but it's evolving into a question that affects everyone. Who gets to define justice? Governments, media, or the people who refuse to look away? This question doesn't end with one speech or one nation's reaction. It's echoing in universities where students demand divestment. It's in newsrooms debating what neutral reporting even means. It's in international organizations balancing humanitarian principles with political alliances. Every institution, every leader now faces the same dilemma: to stay quiet and protect relationships, or to speak up and risk the backlash. And in that choice lies the future of global integrity. If this moment becomes a catalyst, it won't be because of who spoke, but because of who listened. Change often begins in discomfort. The global tension around this issue might expose uncomfortable truths about selective empathy and conditional morality. It forces the world to look at itself to see where compassion ends and calculation begins. In time, this could transform diplomacy, reshaping how nations handle movements led by ordinary citizens. It could influence elections, trade decisions, and global cooperation on other crises. But more deeply, it may awaken a generation that refuses to separate environmental justice from human rights or peace from accountability. That's the real shift, the merging of causes once seen as separate into one unified demand for moral consistency. And so, as the world debates her words, a new global stage is being built. One where the next battles will not just be about land or resources, but about truth, humanity, and the courage to care even when it's inconvenient. In the end, this was never just about one voice or one statement. It was about what happens when truth collides with power, and how one person's courage can spark a conversation the world can't ignore. Whether you agree or not, the moment someone dares to speak up, the world shifts, even slightly. It forces us to question what we've accepted for too long, to confront the difference between silence and peace, and to ask who really benefits when we stay quiet. The world is watching this story unfold. But the real question is, what will you do with what you've seen? Will you choose comfort or will you choose clarity? Will you stand by and scroll past? Or will you start asking the harder questions about truth, justice, and what kind of world we're becoming? If this moment truly is a catalyst, it's because people like you are watching, thinking, and refusing to look away. So before you go, share your thoughts below. What do you think this confrontation means for the future? And if you believe conversations like this matter, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because the dialogue doesn't end here. It's only just beginning.